Well, hello, everybody. It's David Leis, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. We're live today, and it is 9/11, 2025. In other words, September 11, 2025, the year of our Lord, and a warm welcome to everyone joining us. We are so grateful that you could join us for this important conversation as we dare to discuss on this anniversary of 9/11, what are the lessons from that day and all that unfolded. It's a almost overwhelming topic, but it's one that we choose not to avoid because it's important as we reflect on the lessons learned, or frankly, have we learned anything from 9/11? As we look to 2025, we want to talk about the vision. We want to talk about, we've got everybody coming on board here. And one of the reasons why we do the news, not that it's not important, but that's a valuable time for people to come on. And good afternoon, Prairie, and everyone. We've got a lot of regulars from coast to coast to coast. And thank you, Sheridan, for your great commercial moment, encouraging people to like the button, share it. If you think these conversations are important, then share it. That's how the mysterious algorithms of the technology works these days, and it's amazing the response that we get. So I want to just highlight a number of things before we dive into the topic of around 9/11. I want to share some comments that we receive, and we receive thousands every month. Thank you for this discussion. I'm glad to be introduced to the speakers here and to know there are good, courageous people like you speaking out and educating the rest of us. And that's from Jane Payton. So thank you so much, Jane. This note is simply to thank you for your work on behalf of Canada and Canadians, including me. Others might not understand the importance and quality of your work, but I certainly do. Excellent guests and discussions. I urge and encourage you to keep on keeping on. Thank you, John. Well, on that note, I mean, our mission at Frontier is to advocate in the tradition of classical liberalism, free markets, values that empower individuals to live their lives and to prosper, to do that in freedom. And so our mission is really about education, and we hope that we're doing that. And thank you very much for your feedback. Well, there's an awful lot in the news today. You may have heard about EV mandates. I want to share this clip from the Prime Minister that he just made on, I believe, was September 5, courtesy of CPAC.
And it's not all about money. Some of it is about regulation. So to add flexibility to the automotive sector, we will remove the 2026 electric vehicle availability standard, which specifies the share of new vehicle sales that must be electric next year. This will provide immediate financial relief to automakers at a time of increased pressure on their competitiveness. And the government.
So that announcement pauses, quote, EV mandates or electric vehicle mandates for a year. Does that help? What do you think? Yesterday, we were all saddened to hear about a tragedy. The founder of what is called Turning Point USA was assassinated. Charlie Kirk was 31, and he was killed at Utah Valley University yesterday at an event. The FBI, I believe, is on the perpetrator's trail, and photos have been announced. But Charlie Kirk died so young. He believed in God, family, and certainly country. And he was a devout Christian who really advocated freedom of speech in the search of truth, one of our great traditions in Western civilization, as we try to do that with respect. And he did so with conviction on the basis that he would enter all kinds of settings, including post-secondary campuses, and seek conversations in that effort of that same spirit. Let us remember his wife and his two children. And we certainly on this program are in that same type of tradition. We believe that healthy discussion matters. And if we're not having that kind of debate, then we're not thinking, and nor are we free. So rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. The immigration file's caught a lot of attention as we look at that complex file. There's a lot of temporary visa holders in this country, and concerns also about related security matters, as the federal government just announced, I believe the other week, that some 17,600 immigrants have been let in and received an application with the known knowledge that they had criminal records, but they were let into the country. So that's certainly a very important question. Are appropriate safety measures being taken? And perhaps we'll discuss that today. And related to that is the whole issue of temporary visa holders in this country. There's some 3.2 million, if memory serves me correctly, in the nation. And there's calls by the leader of the opposition here to end this kind of program.
Nearly 75% of temporary foreign workers that come into the country are for low-wage positions, which means they compete with working class and young people that ultimately drive down wages and drive away jobs. Tim Hortons has hired an unimaginable 1,131% more temporary foreign workers in the last 4 years. In the first half of this year alone, the TFW program has imported 74% more low-skilled labor than in all of 2015. TFWs, the number of temporary foreign workers, is now 2% of our overall workforce, and a staggering number, an unprecedented number. Now, the Liberals promised they would cap the temporary foreign worker program at 82,000, but in the first 6 months, they've already handed out 105,000 permits. To put this into perspective, if they do the same number of permits for temporary foreign workers in the next 6 months that they did in the last, they will break the record again with over 200,000 temporary foreign workers coming in to take jobs when our own young people are facing record unemployment.
So there you have it, a call to change that program. What do you think? We'd love to hear from you. And as we look to another significant announcement that's actually happened today, unfortunately, I was not able to fully review the announcement. It had to do with the listing of national building projects. And here's a clip from Energy Minister at the federal level.
All of the premiers and the Prime Minister are committed to growing Canada. We have talked extensively, starting back in Saskatoon at the First Ministers' Conference, about a whole range of projects to build Canada strong. It covers everything from rail, roads, ports, renewable energy, conventional energy. I could keep going. We have to focus, ladies and gentlemen. We're in a hinge moment. The United States has decided to change the way the world trades, the way we are going to integrate into the global economy. We have to respond to that. We didn't ask for this trade war, but we need to respond to this trade war.
You have to understand the list is going to be an evergreening list. It's not, oh my gosh, this is it, nothing else can be added. And so we've got a little bit of work to do to be able to get to an environment where oil companies want to expand their production. The way pipelines work is that they go around and they ask producers to pledge barrels. And our producers have been very clear that the 9 bad laws that are preventing them from being able to invest is one of the barriers. So when I talk to the Prime Minister about the grand bargain, it includes talking about repealing or revising the 9 bad laws, the CO2 pipeline that Pathways is proposing, as well as a bitumen pipeline. So we're in active discussions right now, and I'm very encouraged about where we're heading. But don't think that the list as it appears is the final list.
Okay, there you go. There's comments from Federal Energy Minister Hodgson and as well as Alberta Premier Danielle Smith on the unfolding of those announcements. So stay tuned on that story. So on that note, I'd like to dive into the topic about 9/11. I'd like to introduce two extraordinary guests and friends, and I want to welcome Lieutenant General Michel Maisonneuve, and he's joining us. Michel, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Glad to be here.
Merci. And I also have Colonel David Redman, and he's retired as well, and all-around good guy. And I'm so glad that both gentlemen could join me today. I can't think of, frankly, better people to join us in this conversation because you were there at 9/11. The images are indelibly printed on our minds, the horrific images of planes, commercial liners being redirected into the Twin Towers in New York City and Manhattan, as well as the Pentagon and, of course, the Pennsylvania field. And 3,000 people died that day. And it really led to a whole series of events that are frankly mind-boggling as we remember that on 9/11. And I want to, of course, remember in our thoughts and prayers still to this day, all the people impacted, frankly, on that day and then around the world in terms of the subsequent events. I want to begin, General, by asking you, where were you on 9/11? Do you remember that day?
Merci beaucoup, David. Of course, I remember it. I have a hard time looking at these images, actually, and I have since, for the last 24 years, had a hard time looking at these images. And I was in Ottawa at the National Defense Headquarters. I was the Assistant Deputy Chief of Defense Staff, and the job of the DCDS at the time was to coordinate all operations in Canada and outside Canada. Of course, in the National Defense Operations Center were the televisions, and we watched these events unfolding. It was unbelievable at the time. We immediately called a meeting of the Joint Staff Action Team, which was a coordinated Army, Navy, Air Force, Special Forces group to see what our response would be. And of course, the first thing we did, and we had total direct contact with NORAD, so we shut down Canadian airspace and got all the aircraft to land. So it was unbelievable time, and of course I remember it well. My wife was also involved. She was in the Financial Control Center, so intimately involved in this. So it was quite an event. And you have to remember that NORAD at the time, the director of operations was a Canadian, Major General Eric Finley, who's a good friend, and he actually was in charge of NORAD and getting these airplanes coordinated and brought down. So it was a real tough time for everybody.
And Colonel David Redman, what do you remember of that day?
I was driving to a meeting, and of course, here in Edmonton, it was 2 hours earlier in the morning. And so I was driving to a meeting, and my wife called me on my cell phone and said, something incredible's going on. A plane just hit one of the two towers. And while she had me on the phone, she went, oh my God, a second plane has hit the second tower. And so we opened the Emergency Operations Center. During that day, we brought 24 wide-bodied aircraft down into the city of Edmonton, 26 into the city of Calgary, working all of our emergency management centers across every one of the 314 communities in Alberta. We first screened, made sure there was no bad people on the planes that had landed, and then we housed them for 3 days, using all of our reception centers. But at 8 o'clock that night, I got a call saying, go home, go to bed. The Premier, Ralph Klein, had formed a task force on security. And so the next morning at 8 o'clock, what I call the 26 brightest people in Alberta was gathered together in a room. And by 10 o'clock that morning, ultimately, I ended up being what was called the head of counterterrorism in Alberta. And we put together a plan with our private sector, all the sectors that make up the economy in Alberta, to identify the critical infrastructure and to protect it for the future. And ultimately, the ambassador to the U.S., Paul Cellucci, came and we briefed him on it.
So you can see why, to the audience, why these two gentlemen are here. And I think what's fascinating as well, I should just note in my own story, I was actually in North Bay, where NORAD was based, working on a technology installation, and I knew right away. So it was really quite a profound day.
The thing in that, David, is you can listen when you listen to David Redman. This was more than just a military issue. It was an emergency issue. As a society, we had to react, and I remember very well as well that 2 weeks before I'd been in New York, and I'd brought my son, and both of us were by the World Trade Center looking up one of the corners. Straight up, and what an engineering marvel it was. But I mean, obviously a great target for Al-Qaeda at the time to demonstrate that they could do this on top of course, the Pentagon and the airplane in Pennsylvania. And the other piece that was interesting is from that point on, we started doing drills, exercises where we would have to get hold, if we had an aircraft that was incoming that was not squawking, which means identifying a friend or foe, and there was a danger that it was going to need to be shot down. We had to get hold of the Prime Minister Chrétien at the time. And so we organized a number of exercises where we actually played a scenario where, there was an aircraft, we had to shoot it down, and we got hold of the Prime Minister. And, of course, he didn't have to make a decision for real. But, this created a whole bunch of of second and third on follow-on effects.
No, I think that's well said, is that the domino effect is profound and the amount of work behind the scenes is really hard to comprehend. And I think it's also worthy to note how so many Canadians in their own way reacted, both personally, but also as a team. I think of course, the famous stories about so many Canadians, like in Gander, Newfoundland, welcoming so many aircraft who were caught up in these difficult situations and they had to be grounded, and the myriad of thousands of people that needed to be looked after. So it's really a remarkable story and memory. So I wanted to turn to both of you then, in terms of your specific roles, if you could just help us understand. And I want to go to you, General, first. As we look at you ended up playing a leadership role on behalf of this country right in Tampa. The operational headquarters is follow-up to 9/11, with, of course, General Tommy Franks, who led the Allies in terms of their response and follow-up. And you were literally at the table representing Canada, and that we had a place at the table. Can you help us describe to us what happened?
Well, and I like to say, of course, in those days, and as I mentioned in my book, the Canada really mattered in those days. On the 3rd of October, the Chief of Defense Staff, General Rehaneau, sent me down. I was a 2-star general, and he gave me each a 1-star from the Navy and 1-star from the Air Force to go down to Tampa to speak to General Franks to see what we could offer in terms of a coalition, the coalition of the willing to participate in the war on terrorism. So we went down there on the 3rd of October, and we worked, bright and early every day until on this. And in those days, General Franks would have a coordinating conference at 9 o'clock every morning. And at 9 o'clock on the 7th of October, I was sitting, and General Franks was in the center of the table, and on the right side was a little sign said Canada, on the left UK, and then beyond that, Australia. So we were to the right of the boss, if you wish, and that's where Canada, our participation was key, I think. And we were developing packages. What could we offer? First thing we talked about was rerouting our ship that belonged to NATO towards the Adriatic and so forth, and to be closer to the theater of war. But on the 7th of October, at the 9 o'clock meeting in the morning, General Franks said, and I walked in there, and on the screen was Donald Rumsfeld, all the commanders on the ground in the central area, which is obviously the Middle East and so forth, were there on the screen. And General Franks turned to everyone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, at noon today, the first Tomahawk land attack missile will land on Kabul. That would be the start of the war." So it's 9 in the morning here, and at noon, so 3 hours later. Incredible historic moment. And as I say, here was Canada to the right of General Franks. At this point, I ran, after the meeting, I went to my office, and on a secure line, I called General Rehaneau, the Chief of Defense Staff. It was a Sunday, if I remember. And I called the Chief of Defense Staff, and I said, I told him that this was actually happening in a couple of hours. And so he immediately, he called the Prime Minister, Chrétien, and I guess Prime Minister Chrétien said, "Oh, that's why George W. Bush wants to speak to me at 11, to inform him that this was going to start." So there were all kinds of, effects from that point on, obviously, as you know. But the point is that Canada was a player. We mattered in those days. George W. Bush was calling to let us know that this was happening. We were involved in the planning. Our forces were ready to deploy, and we were offering packages. So, it's a great example of where Canada was at that time. And you remember, this was like 3 weeks after September 11th. So it was a very quick issue.
Remarkable story, and Canada was at the table. So thank you, General, for that service in that context. Very important historic time, as you know. So Colonel David Redman, what was your story? How did you catapult into your conversations with the ambassador from the United States?
Well, as I stated, the Premier of Alberta formed the Task Force on Security at midnight on September the 12th, within hours. And so a group was formed. It was called the Task Force on Security, and I believe it represented the brightest minds at the time across all sectors of our industry, but across all orders of government. So we had people from the federal government, RCMP and CSIS. We had people from all the main departments in the provincial government, and we had municipal government. But more importantly, we had the private sector in the room. 85% of critical infrastructure, as we discovered in the following 2 years, is owned and operated by the private sector. And of course, they don't come with armed security. And so what we did in that first 6 weeks is we worked together to collaborate to build a plan, which the Premier approved on November the 9th, which was then implemented over the next 2 years across all of the infrastructure in Alberta. And Paul Cellucci repeatedly said, the American ambassador to Canada repeatedly said from 9/11 on, security trumps trade. He said it in every speech, he said it in every forum. So when he came out 2 years later into Alberta, at the request of his consul from Calgary, who had seen what we had done in Alberta, I was one-on-one with him, just the two of us. I briefed him in a secure center for 2 hours. And at the end of it, he invited me to go to Washington to brief Congress and the Senate members of, and the new Standing Up DHS, which was just being formed at the time. There had been an office, now there was a department, ultimately briefing Michael Chertoff and the first 3 directors in DHS. Because what we did is we linked all of the private sector into a threat level assessment together with a clear identification of their security requirements and how we would then layer police of jurisdiction and the armed forces to protect that which would keep the lights on, the water flowing, and the food in people's stomachs, should we ever have an attack like that in Alberta. So it was working with everyone, private sector, public sector, all orders of government, to try and build the thing. And Ambassador Cellucci was very clear that he was massively impressed. And as the General has said, Canada was a player. He wanted what we were doing in Canada being brought down to the political levels in Washington, D.C. to show what could be achieved across all orders of government. And Canada was a player.
Very good. So I'm talking with Colonel David Redman and General Michel Maisonneuve, retired, and we are reflecting on 9/11. Where were you? We certainly appreciate your comments from the audience, and we're learning a lot about the stories of these two gentlemen. And of course, everyone has a story for those of you that were around on 9/11. And it behooves us, if we are to certainly respect all that came out of that horrific tragedy and those people who died, to remember this time, but also remember the lessons learned. So my next question is, and I know it's a far-reaching one, but are there some obvious lessons learned? And David Redman, you mentioned about your conversation with the ambassador, saying, what is it again, the phrase? Security trumps trade. What does that mean exactly? To ask I don't want to sound too obtuse here, but help us understand what that question really means.
Well, it's not the first time Canada was told that. Back in 1970, Pierre Trudeau was told that if we didn't have a main battle tank in Europe, trade in Europe would cease. Now we see it again with the current administration in the United States saying the same thing again. We either step up and we do our part in security. So maybe just there's 2 overarching, there's 6 national interests to define a country, but the top 2 are unity and national security. If you don't take the first 2 seriously, you don't have a country. And what we've been called out now and in the past at times, that we weren't doing enough to guarantee our own national security made up of the 10 elements. And so what we were able to prove at that time is that we were taking it seriously. And that's why Ambassador Cellucci wanted our knowledge to help spur what was going on in the US. But it really is, you don't have a country if you don't have unity and you don't have national security.
Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. So, General Maisonneuve, what would you say are some of the key lessons that come out of 9/11?
Well, I'm going to be rather dramatic here, but say that Osama bin Laden won. Okay? He won. What he wanted to do was to change the world, and he certainly changed the security situation of the entire planet. I mean, just remember what it was like flying in the old days before 9/11. Flying was a little bit, glamorous, and you could enjoy yourself and go see the aircraft up close, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's a whole different situation, and the events that happened after, like the shoe bomber and all these guys, contributed to actually, make us spend billions of dollars. And believe it or not, I mean, we have spent billions of dollars on security since 9/11. That's why I say Osama bin Laden won. He got what he wanted. But I would tell you the other side of the coin is it's very difficult to be a terrorist today. Very difficult because, of course, everybody's ears are ready, CSIS and all the security organizations. The other thing I would say, the lesson for me, and David is exactly right in terms of our lack of ability today and our lack of being at the table even, or taking security seriously. But I look at the coalition of the willing that was set up in Tampa at the time, and the number of nations that started participating. We were one of the first, along with the UK and Australia, etc. But you look at this coalition of the willing. Today, I think we have a coalition of the weak. You look at the way we're reacting to NATO, for example, and I was outraged to hear that Russia flew some drones into Poland. I mean, really? And we haven't done anything about it? I mean, why don't we fly a few drones ourselves into Russia just to tit for tat? I mean,
well, I even understand there's high-level surveillance balloons coming in from China all over the continent.
So listen, I just really think that this is we have the coalition of the weak is now instead of the willing. So transformation at airports, travel, security writ large, borders. But really, it's you look at the Taliban are back in power in Afghanistan. Women are the Muslim Brotherhood is operating in Canada. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood. It's not the Muslim Sisterhood. It's the Muslim Brotherhood. So, I mean, these are all lessons that we just have not learned, and we have made some strides in terms of security. For example, border, etc. And I remember John Manley working hard with this stuff, and exactly what you were talking about, David. But really, there's a lot of work to be done. And let's not talk about the Canadian Armed Forces.
But there you have it. In terms of, I don't think it's a provocative message. It's frankly a message of truth that Osama bin Laden won in some measure, because we've never. You think of, the whole situation with Afghanistan, that withdrawal or the inability to really stabilize that situation. And then, there's other decisions that were made going into Iraq. Canada did not do that. And these are very complex, quote, interventions. And they beg the question, what was the mission? What was the scope? But
as far as going into Iraq or Afghanistan, it's interesting. When I was there at National Defense Headquarters, we wanted Prime Minister Chrétien to make a decision. Of course, we had, people have different views going to Afghanistan or going to Iraq or going to both, but we didn't think we could do both. But we wanted him to make a decision early enough so we could prepare our troops properly. Obviously, there were a lot of missing things like, deploying with green outfits and so on. But in general terms, he made the decision. And we lived by that decision.
Indeed. So we are in 2025, and you've already, both of you have alluded to the dynamics of today. The issues still continue in terms of security concerns about terrorism. I remember well having all kinds of analysis and discussion with all kinds of counterparts around where did this originate from? Was it a surprise that there was this particular part of radical Islam, namely Wahhabism? That was a significant issue that came to fore. And what were the origins and why were people radicalized? How would you ever commit suicide missions like this? It was almost, so many of us in the West were so naive, if not surprised by this issue. So David Redman, were you surprised with the emergence of terrorism right on our own continent? We're not used to people committing suicide in the name of some kind of ideology.
No, not surprised at all, because of where both Michel and I had been in our past lives. But maybe just there's 10 things make up national security. If we just look at the top three, we talk about intelligence services, border services, and immigration services as the top three. And then I can carry on going down critical infrastructure, policing, judiciary. But if we just look at the top three, I'll give you the story from by the end of September, we had already built an integrated intelligence service, so the top one of the three. And CSIS and the RCMP were telling us at the time that the largest fundraising center for ISIS and Al Qaeda in North America was Alberta.
Pardon me?
It came as a shock to many people. They were making the money mostly in Fort McMurray through prostitution, through drugs, through everything else, into a small area that had a lot of money. And they were making massive amounts to support Al Qaeda and ISIS worldwide.
Sorry,
out of Canada.
You got to stop the presses here for a second, Colonel David Redman. What the heck are you talking about? What year was this? And you're talking about money coming from Fort McMurray, Alberta, helping to fund what? Again, pardon me.
To fund terrorism worldwide. Now, you understand, when we were building the counterterrorism plan in Alberta, we were trying to link intelligence services directly into what was the most critical infrastructure, having predefined security levels. So something that was vital would never be below level 3 security, but you needed the intelligence trigger to move it up or down. And we knew right here in our own province, we had people with malintent. But at the time, they were doing it covertly, under the radar. What we see in our streets today is from September 11th to now, and I want to go back to what Michel said, Osama bin Laden won, because it has become normalized that terrorist organizations can walk in our streets and scream, death to all Jews, death to all Christians, death to Canada, and nobody does anything. So as we work down, we get to police of jurisdiction, they're not doing their job, judiciary not doing their job, out of those 10 things. But if it starts at the top, first of all with intelligence services, then our border services, which are porous, and coming through the Port of Vancouver, you can bring anything you want in. But if we get to the next one, immigration services, we now know, it's public knowledge, that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the largest deployment of IRGC in the world outside of Iran, is in British Columbia. So how did we get from covertly fundraising in Canada to openly marching in our streets, screaming for the death of Canadians, and the deterioration of every one of the 10 pieces of national security? And so ultimately the question is how do we put it back in place? Because that's what our partner to the south is. One of the first things, the very first step in national security, is understanding geopolitics. And we have our largest trading partner, our largest security partner, and our best friend living on the same continent. And they will not permit enemies of their country to exist in our country and offer threats to them. So they will be forced to take action if we don't. And what we've seen over the history of our country is a constant balancing to put enough into national security to be a relevant player. And I put it to you, we are not a relevant player anymore on the world stage, but more importantly, geopolitically, to the superpower that lives to our south.
Well, that's quite a revelation. I'm sure I speak on behalf of the audience that many of us would be shocked that there's sources of money funding all this stuff within Canada. And, General Maisonneuve, would you agree with that fundamental assessment by Colonel David Redman that we're not a player, and that we've kind of, I don't know what the term is, been asleep at the wheel when it comes to dealing with these threats right among us?
Well, I think I definitely agree with everything he said. And this is news to me as well, that we're funding to that level, and it's and the other point you made, Dave, I think is very, very relevant. You look at what happened after 9/11 and how everyone in the Coalition of the Willing, populations in Canada, wanted to defeat terrorism. Everyone was prepared to speak about it, to demonstrate about it, and there were demonstrations all across the country. I remember many of them in Ottawa, supporting security services, et cetera, et cetera. Nowadays, as you say, we let people support a terrorist organization like Hamas, openly. Nobody is, they're marching through the streets. Anti-Semitism is up 647%, I think. Were my my figures, but so yeah, we really lost something here. We've lost something,
Wow.
and of course, you also talk about our place in the world, and people don't realize that the armed forces of a country and all the other services, intelligence, et cetera, those are the things that demonstrate your involvement internationally, that demonstrate your abilities and demonstrate your capacities internationally. And we'll move to the Canadian Forces later, but we are so out of touch. Our military is not even able to support a small, tiny half or quarter brigade in Europe right now, and that is the only commitment we have, major commitment. So it is it's ridiculous.
It is truly ridiculous. Ray Davis says, "Fools asleep at the wheel." So what do you think about our conversation? I mean, I look at this and I think there's some pretty important themes to pay attention to, one of which is Canada was on the stage on 9/11. We were a player. We were acting as a partner. And security was an important issue. And there was a resolve. I think that's a key word. There was a resolve, a commitment to be there to protect our citizens, to protect our nation. And now, for whatever reason, we're in a situation where it's pretty wobbly, to put it politely. And we've got a lot of renewal that needs to happen. And so I want to get to that context where, quite frankly, we need to not only rebuild our military, we've been, frankly, not a full partner there. So what are your observations about the state of today, Colonel Redman? What do we need to do to get this back on track?
Well, we have to, first of all, identify what is the future of Canada. We need a 25-year vision, a positive vision. And as in previous discussions, Michel and I have talked offline on a number of times. And his word I really like, which is a sense of purpose. Canada needs a sense of purpose. And it's got to be built on a 25-year vision that pulls all Canadians forward. And we need to talk about all 6 of the national interests: unity, national security, good governance, rights and freedoms, economic prosperity and growth, and societal well-being. But if we don't focus on the first 2, unity and national security, the rest will continue to crumble, as we've seen. And so if we just talk national security, because it is 9/11 today, and if we focus on the elements of it, I believe we need a national task force on security, just like Premier Klein put in place on security in Alberta after 9/11 within hours. And so we need to talk about immigration as the #1 driver of some of the things that are happening, but we need to rebuild our intelligence services, our border services, our intelligence services, our critical infrastructure protection, our policing, get our judiciary realigned with a vision of Canada. And immigration, to me, is the #1 issue. I believe we need to put a pause on all forms of immigration and refugees for at least 1 year, probably longer, but at least 1 year, to redefine a policy for Canada that doesn't allow groups that hate our country to be pouring into our country and now marching in our streets, as we see on a routine basis. So for me, it's building a task force on security with working groups on every one of the elements of national security, reporting back to a prime minister who has a clear vision for our country going forward, but that involves our federal government, provincial territorial governments, our municipal government, plus all of the private sector.
Okay, so we need a clear vision. If we want to go somewhere, we need to know where we're going. And so a vision is really critical here. And I want to cite something that's very interesting. And I General Maisonneuve, you've read a dynamite book called In Defense of Canada. I certainly recommend it. But you wrote a fascinating article. It was published in the National Post on July 8, and I recommend it. It says, "Which future will Canada choose?" You co-authored it with another leader, Jeffrey Reynolds. And the question is, we can dither and decline or scale and soar. And I thought it was very interesting. And I want to highlight something you said. We stand at another inflection point. Choose to dither and decline or scale and soar. To soar is to have a bold vision for Canada, to be a great power in the world and contribute mightily to the upward march of civilization. Why did you write that article, General Michel?
Well, it kind of follows on what David was talking about. This whole idea of a vision. You know, our leaders need to have a vision of what this country can be, and I believe we have so much potential. So the first thing our leaders need to do is give Canadians hope by developing a vision that says, look, Canada can achieve this incredible potential that we have. We have a great population, very well-informed and educated. We have incredible resources. We have 2 official languages, which many countries don't. We have all kinds of very positive things that can make and we have governance. We have, institutions that are good. But we need to renew all these things. And that vision that David's talking about, to me, is really the key to this, to give hope to Canadians. Then the other thing is, you can talk about immigration, but we need to have an identity. What is a Canadian? And we don't have one of those right now. So immigrants who come to Canada are encouraged to keep their own nationality, multiculturalism, et cetera, whereas we need to bring people who, and when they come, we need to say, okay, here's what you're joining. You're joining this country based on, which was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And here are what our values are. And so when you join this country, you need to understand that that's it. If you don't want to join this country for its values, then just don't come. Don't come, stay in your own country. And so these are big issues, but they're all included in that vision that David's talking about. And in that article, we talk about Canada has the potential to be a very strong middle power. I would say the strongest middle power. And yeah, we can be at the same level as France, as the UK. We have that ability to be there with the population, the resources, the governance that we have. So we just need to have a leader that's going to take us there.
Right on. So this is a very important discussion because it's not just simply about 9/11, a tragedy that happened years ago, but it is certainly looking to the future. What kind of country are we going to become? What is the vision and purpose of this nation? So this is a challenging conversation. I hope you're appreciating this. We've got a lot of comments from the audience. Kenzie says, we do have an identity, but it's being disparaged and guilt-ridden. Well said.
I would agree with that. And, the comment I would make about that is we have apologized enough now. We've apologized. We understand that we made so many mistakes, but we should not judge our leaders of the past by today's standards. And so we've apologized. And now let's get on with the future and stop, guilting Canadians.
Right on. Well, all it takes is for someone to have some eyes. I was on a friend's ranch this past week, and I was just shocked by both the scenery and the rugged territory, and said, my God, how did these people settle this country is really quite remarkable. So we want to celebrate that for sure. And I want to pick up a little bit further, Colonel Redman, about the context of today. I had quite an interview with a fellow colleague of ours, Scott McGregor. He's an intelligence analyst. And I want to share that clip with you because I think it's quite an eye-opener. We may not have that clip available, but the punchline was that Mr. McGregor was making the point that we have a kind of asymmetrical warfare going on, that we have an interesting combination of criminal syndicates. They're called cartels. They're the usual suspects from places such as Mexico and beyond. And, David Redman, you alluded to this earlier, that Hamas is here in Canada. But it's not just them. It's a whole kind of busload of them. And they found kind of a safe haven in Canada, an environment that is kind of friendly and enabling to them. And I don't say that lightly, but they're doing their business, which is bad business. And it is truly remarkable that this is going on in our country. Am I being too dramatic here, Colonel David?
No. And so for those that don't know, I wrote a paper, Canada, a strong, resilient nation or a fearful, fractured country, back in 2024, where I broke the 6 national interests down and asked for that 25-year vision based on clearly subdividing those 6 national interests. And so when you talk about Hamas, you talk about all of the groups, the IRGC, the different
Muslim Brotherhood.
The Muslim Brotherhood,
Yeah.
but the Russians, the Chinese that have been interfering in our elections, that nothing's been done about, the funding of Chinese police stations terrorizing citizens, Canadian citizens in our own country. This is a very broad spectrum, but what are they trying to do? They desperately, remember the geopolitical situation. The United States is their target. Canada is a route to the United States. So the first thing they need to do is to dissolve Canada. So back on September 11th, 2001, what we were trying to do was to make sure that we didn't damage any of the institutions of Canada while we stopped terrorism. Because if we did destroy Canadian institutions, the terrorists had won. That was their intent, was to destroy our freedom and our democracy. So when I look and see what things like Scott is saying and what we're all talking about here today, the first attack is on our unity. And they're using every possible crowbar to break Canadians into smaller and smaller groups and pit them against each other. So they're intentionally targeting unity. They are intentionally targeting every one of the elements of national security. And so they've made it now so our intelligence services aren't taken seriously by our allies. Our border services are porous. Our immigration services are wide open, and I can keep going down that list. But as well, they've gone after good governance, which is the third element of the national interest. And so they've attacked our political system, our election system, our legislative systems, all of the systems that make up good governance, including our judiciary. And our free press. What free press, right? Then if you keep going down, rights and freedoms, the destruction of rights and freedoms, groups that are attacking the women's rights in our country, trying to make sure that we understand that women are subservient, not equal to men. When you look at all of these groups that are coming in, they're very much trying to even destroy the simple thing like rights and freedoms of women in our country. Economic prosperity and growth, they've ensured that no one wants to invest in Canada anymore. And so they're making things happen right down to societal well-being, the 6 of the national interests, and attacking things like our healthcare system and our educational system, and fully permeating our educational system so that the next generation of Canadians doubts that there ever should have been a Canada, let alone whether or not we have a proud history to be proud of. And so when we look at each of the 6 national interests, what these groups are doing today is attacking every one of the 6 national interests. And that's why I wrote that paper, which is on Frontier Center for Public Policy, Canada 2024, to try and inspire the next generation of Canadians to engage with their politicians to demand a vision for the future that's based on a free, open, democratic society, not a tyranny.
Right on. So I encourage people to look at that paper. It's interesting. There's and I don't quite know how to pronounce the name here from the audience, cryptomeria. My biggest fear is it's too late. What we knew of Canada is gone. And that is, I'm sorry, my friends, this is a question I hear too often because I am someone who believes we're all in. We've got to work hard together to move this country forward. We will not accept defeat. But Canada's future is a choice. That's the point. And so the question is, General Maisonneuve, is it too late or can we bring this forward? We've got a lot of work to do. If Colonel Dabin's right, you're right. We've got a lot of work to do. This is like a full court press. 9/11 was a full court press. 2025 demands a full court press.
Absolutely. It's a project of society, but what we need for this project is we need some leadership and we need service. Those are the 2 things that I think are really required to get us out of this doldrum. But I do ask myself, is it too late for our country? Is it too late to bring these disparate groups together? I've often also asked myself, can Canada be governed from a central point? There's such a differences in, Atlantic Canada, Quebec, Ontario, the center of the universe. Then you've got the West, and then you've got the BC, and you've got the North. Can this country be governed by one central government? And can we? But it requires leadership, and it requires service, and in that service, it requires sacrifice as well. So when you're talking about doing something major, getting this vision brought, having people mobilized to achieve that vision, it's going to require sacrifice. Different parts of the country are not going to like everything that goes into the vision, but they're going to say, well, for Canada as a whole, this is a good thing. So I will sacrifice my little piece of the, of the pie, if you wish, to make sure that the whole works, and that we achieve that vision that we've set for ourselves. So is it too late? I hope not. I don't think I don't think it's too late. We need to all work towards the same thing. But the question is, what is that same thing? And so it comes back to David's question. What is our vision in 25 years? Where do we want Canada to be? Do we want to dither and just keep, salami slicing forward? Or do we want to have bold vision that takes us there and says, here's what our country can be. Here's what we aspire to be. Here's what we're all working towards being.
Right on. Well said. I really believe more and more the importance of the role of citizens here to move this country forward. And I think I know both of you pretty well, and I know that you care deeply about our fellow citizens and the role that they play to move this country forward. And of course, I can hear the ringing speech of a former president who said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And surely that's the question for today, is what can we do? Leadership is always involves sacrifice.
Absolutely. And you know what? This comes back to this vision, to the identity of our country. If we want to stop pitting groups against each other, as David says, you need to have one identity that everybody says, okay, this is what Canada is. This is what we're working towards. And that becomes the important piece, as opposed to that little cultural piece of your own that perhaps you came from another era. I'm an 11th generation Canadian. So, I feel that I'm a Canadian. Yes, I'm a Francophone, but that's it. And so we need to get to that vision. We need to develop it.
Right on. So Colonel David Redman, what can citizens do to move this country forward?
They have to become engaged. The solution has to be top down and bottom up simultaneously. We've produced a generation through helicopter parenting and bulldozer parenting that believes all risk belongs to government. So we have to start bottom up in an educational system, starting in our K to 9s and our K to 12s, where we teach resilience back into children. Mm-hmm. And so that's starting the bottom up. And it took 40 years to get where we're at with helicopter parenting and bulldozer. It'll take at least a decade to bring it up. But if we don't start now, we won't. Top down, what I expect of political leaders, and remember, I always say federal government, provincial territorial government, and municipal government, we have to inspire that vision. We need to see mayors and reeves that are empowered and can't believe how great their city is going to be, with a vision that links into a provincial territorial, because municipalities are a product of each province and territory, that links into a national vision. Mm-hmm. And the federal government should be the tiniest piece. And as you go down through each order of government, it gets bigger in how we see the world going forward, because the problem we've got now is too much overreach coming from the top down. Mm-hmm. So we need to empower municipal governments more, provincial territorial governments, so we can reflect the differences in our country, but while linking to a singular view. And I put it together, the danger is manifest destiny has been envisioned in the United States since there was a United States. They have always believed that the whole North American continent would ultimately be theirs sooner rather than later in some people's minds. I know my parents both fought in World War II in uniform. I know Michel's people were involved. The pride in this country goes way back, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a reason why Canada's Canada and isn't part of the United States. And it's not because we hate them. It's just because we're a different group of peoples. And that unity has to be rebuilt and re-understood. Why? The ethics and values of Canadians are clearly easily to be defined. I've done it many times. It's in the paper, but it's also in a number of other sessions I've had with other people to try and get people to understand that Canadians are unique and we're a wonderful, unique democracy. And I put it to you that both Michel and I served all over the world, and people would come up and tap us on the shoulder where our Canadian flag was and say, I wish I'd been born in Canada. You have such a great country. They knew what we were. They looked at us from afar and understood the mosaic that made Canada, but why we were a unique democracy. And so we have to have the pride in unity, number one of the national interest, to teach that to our children, starting bottom up, so that by the time they become adults, there's a hope. And so you asked the question at the start, do I believe that it's impossible to turn it around? It better not be. I have 6 grandchildren who are 19 to 22, and they are wonderful Canadians. I put it to you, they see themselves as Canadians, and their look towards the future is one full of hope, vision, excitement. They are excited to be in this country and have a future, and they're not alone. They went through school with a whole bunch of others who feel like them. It's up to our leaders to stop being intent on getting the next election won by dividing us into smaller groups and by bringing us all together again.
Right on. I love these themes, gentlemen.
I would add a couple of things, if I may, David. I agree 100%. And one of the things that unites people and that makes us proud of a country are heroes. And we just don't talk about our heroes. We have incredible heroes in this country, not just political heroes. We have military heroes. We have Billy Bishop. We have anyway, I mean, we've got incredible heroes that we need to talk about and to get out there. And the last piece I'll say is, I believe very strongly in some sort of national service, and not necessarily military service, compulsory national service, where a young person, man, woman, young woman, will learn about the country, will learn the importance of, they'll be taught some civics, will learn some of the history and some of the heroes that we have. We'll travel to different parts of the country to see, the strength of our country, to see the beauty of it and the potential that it has. But this all fits into that vision that our leaders must take us to.
Right on. It is our choice. And I want to just, as we get to the last stretch of our incredible discussion today, and I want to thank you again for that, is the whole geopolitical situation, I think, is something that perhaps Canadians need to open our eyes up on, and I need your help on this. But I came across a fascinating document that was released back in April by a Chinese consortium. It's a very interesting document that's a guide. It's a navigational guide. It's some 300 pages long that explains how to go from a particular port in China and move cargo systematically across northern gateways through what's called the Northwest Passage along the Canadian Arctic to Deception Inlet, or Deception Bay, pardon me. And I was fascinated to see this document was there in plain sight. So you've got the encouragement, the active encouragement of shipping systematically a lot of cargo right across the Canadian Arctic. What does that mean?
Let me start, and then I'll hand it over to David. It means that we have no means of doing anything about it, is what it means. We have no way of getting up north to look at if we say that the Northwest Passage is in our internal waters, you can say it all you want, but unless you're able to actually do something about somebody that disagrees, then you're stuck. It's all virtue signaling, which we're great at doing. We're great at schooling other nations and saying, virtue signaling and scolding them and so on. But we have no leg to stand on. We're actually powerless to do this. And I mean, David and I could talk to you about how Canada is undefended. Well, we are undefended right now. There's nothing we can do in our country. And regardless of what you hear from different places, oh yes, our Navy can get up there. No, we can't. And
we can't.
Once we get up there, well,
you're
we can
saying
sail
we
up
don't
there.
really have that capability to exercise sovereignty over our own field. So you've got people coming in and colonizing to use that loaded term, colonizing from another superpower our
Could.
Arctic gateway.
Yeah, we could. We could not do anything about it. David, over to you, man.
So absolutely agree, Michel. And that's why I wrote the paper last March, Unfit for Duty, Rebuilding the Canadian Armed Forces. And again, it takes a task force with no other purpose for 2 years to start the turnaround. Okay. And I broke it into 5 elements. But when you talk about going across the north, I would put it to you that that's probably on the scale of 1 to 10, it's probably a 2 compared to the Port of Vancouver, where we see massive goods pouring in on a daily basis with less than 1%. And I put it to you, it's probably less than 0.1% of those containers you see in that image being checked every day. And normally the only check they do get is whether or not there's a radioactive source in the container. They can be full of human
Can you
cargo.
repeat that? You mean we're checking out less than 1%, a fraction, and we're only checking out for radioactive indicator?
The spot checks on those containers is almost non-existent. And so there can be people inside, there could be human trafficking, there can be drug trafficking, there can be any type of goods coming through with significantly less than 1% checked in any manner. So our ports are wide open, but it's not just our seaports. And of course, that's where your bulk comes in and out. It's also through our airports, and the ability to properly check and look at what's coming into our country. So yes, the North is extremely important. And we both, Michel and I, remember Arctic sovereignty exercises where in company-sized elements, we strapped on our kit and froze to death for a week, for 10 days in and out with Canadian Rangers. But I put it to Canadian Rangers with the Lee Enfield and 10 rounds aren't going to stop anyone with serious malintent from occupying or entering our space.
Wow.
But it's time that we took the whole under ice operation seriously, as well as surface, as well as super important, the airspace. And our contributions to NORAD, protecting of our airspace, are severely compromised by a fighter jet that's older than all the pilots that fly it, and not integratable into the other aircraft of today. If we don't get a system that can completely interlock, we watch as F-22s had to shoot down the balloon over Canada because we couldn't get that high. So the whole point is we need to restructure the armed forces of Canada, but we need to do it as part of the other security elements. And when I said there's 10 elements that make up national security, I always talk about the Canadian Armed Forces as the canary in the coal mine, but I put them last. And the reason I always talk about them last is they are the force of last resort that backs up all the 9 that come before. All right. And so if any one of those other security elements fails or is overwhelmed, we take that force and plug that gap until that force can take care of itself again, whether it be our border services, whether it be our immigration services, whether it can be our intelligence services, but they're the force of last resort, and we don't have one.
Wow. So we've been reflecting with our friends, General Maisonneuve and Colonel David Redman, on lessons learned about 9/11. And I hope you've picked up loud and clear that from 9/11, it was seen as an urgent situation where there was a demand, a resolve to deal with issues of national security, both internal, domestic, and internationally. And Canada was very much on the world stage. And, well, frankly, it's just the opposite today. So I hope you found this discussion eye-opening. And I just look at this and I think General Maisonneuve and Colonel David Redman, we've got a lot of work to do. And so I guess my final question is, where is our political leadership? I mean, this is just a lot of what we've heard about renewing our security, our safety, our military. My concern is this is just all kabuki theater. No offense to kabuki theater. I mean, it's the ancient Japanese art form where there's this specialized theater, but it's just going to be all theater. It's got to be about action, surely, doesn't it? So what should we be looking for if this is?
Oh, we should be looking for action. You're exactly right. And so far, what we have are promises. We have promises. We have great talk. We have, and much like a kabuki, people wearing masks. masquerading as something they maybe are not. So I'm waiting for some action, and I'm trying to influence this action. But so far, all I've seen is promises. Even talking about the armed forces, the Prime Minister's promised $9 billion will be spent before the 31st of March 2026. There is no way, my friends, that $9 billion will be spent before that time. There is no way. Although there could be, if there was some action, if there was some sense of urgency, if there was a word to go out to industry, we want to rebuild the armed forces, so we need some ammunition, we need spare parts. Those are things that you can do fairly quickly. And right now, I'm telling you, there is no action. So I think I'm going to be waiting for many months, and I hope at some point a leader will come along, and I have faith that a leader will come along that will actually that will mobilize us towards this vision that we're looking for.
Well said. Colonel David Redman.
So democratic leaders use confidence to inspire their nation. Totalitarian governments use fear to subjugate their nation. And all we've seen is rhetoric and fear for the past decade at least. So I believe it's time for an actual plan. Now, that's a very strange word, but Michel and I both know, being taught as brand new officer cadets, we were taught the 13 steps of battle procedure. And I remember intrinsically as a lieutenant being rammed through those steps over and over and over and over again, because the aim was to make a plan and then execute it. All right, implement the plan. And the plan had many courses open. You picked the best one. So if one failed, you had another to go to. That turned into the estimate of the situation. And that's exactly what we used in 9/11 in Alberta to build the Alberta Counterterrorism Crisis Management Plan. Yeah. We used the operational planning process, estimate of the situation, and I led a team of private sector and public sector people through that step by step, and in 6 weeks had a completely detailed written plan that the Premier of Alberta took a pen and signed, and then we implemented over the next 2 years, step by step, in accordance with the plan, the timelines in the plan and the detail. But we held a conference with all the municipal order of government and all the members of the provincial order of government in Calgary for 3 days and showed them the plan. So we had everyone involved, the citizens of Alberta, plus everyone else in each order of government. That's what we need now. We need a task force that's tasked to use the operational planning process to build a plan based on the 6 national interests, and then a group that's tasked specifically for national security because of today's topic, but more importantly, one on unity. So a task force on unity, a task force on national security, and walk them through the process with the brightest minds of Canada in the room from every order of government and the private sector to produce a written plan to give to Canadians and say, do you agree, and invite feedback.
Well, there you have it, everybody. This has been an incredible conversation, General Maisonneuve and Colonel David Redman. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights and your passion, your resolve to help move this country forward. And I want to thank our audience as well. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you for having us.
So that brings to an end our conversation about 9/11. I hope you found it informative. I encourage you to look at our website at Frontier and to dig into the resources that are there about these topics. We care, as you do, about this country, and we want to serve our citizens as we want to see Canada the most free and prosperous nation in the world. And there's no reason why we can't if we work together. So on that note, I want to thank you for joining us, and please be sure to join us next Thursday, the same time and place, and look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.